The United States and Iran ended a historic round of face-to-face talks early on Sunday without reaching an agreement, leaving the status of the fragile 2-week ceasefire unclear. Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the US delegation during the 21 hours of talks in Pakistan's capital Islamabad, said negotiations finished without a deal after the Iranians refused to accept American terms to refrain from developing a nuclear weapon. Also on the evening news. As I write this, the working week is getting underway. In Iran, the roads are busy with cars and taxis. There are people walking to the office. A man and a woman just drove past on a motorbike, her blonde hair catching on the breeze. But there's no easy outs as US-Iran talks collapse in Islamabad. In other news, Hungary are casting ballots on Sunday in what is widely seen as Europe's most consequential election this year. A vote that could unseat populist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, an ally of US President Donald Trump after 16 years in power. Also, expert teams to be sent to hospitals with the highest rates of corridor care. The worst offending trust will be given help to understand data better and improve patient flow, as ministers aim to eradicate corridor care by the end of Parliament.
This is STV News with Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. The United States and Iran ended a historic round of face-to-face talks early on Sunday without reaching an agreement, leaving the status of the fragile 2-week ceasefire unclear. There was no immediate comment from the Iranian delegation, but Pakistani mediators called on both countries to maintain the ceasefire. It is impressive that the parties continue to uphold their commitment to the ceasefire, Pakistan Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar said, adding that his country will try to facilitate a new dialogue between Iran and the US in the coming days. The discussion in Islamabad began on Saturday, a few days after a fragile ceasefire was announced, as the war that had killed thousands of people and shaken global markets enters its 7th week. Vance said he remained in constant communication with US President Donald Trump and others in the administration during the negotiations. But the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon, Vance told reporters. This is the core goal of the President of the United States, and that's what we try to achieve through these negotiations. The Vice President said he has spoken with Trump a half a dozen times and a dozen times over the past 21 hours, and also spoke with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of the United States Central Command. We are constantly in communication with the team because we were negotiating in good faith, Vance said, speaking at a podium in front of a pair of American flags with Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to his side. And we leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding, and that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. But as there's no easy outs as US-Iran talks collapse in Islamabad, Emma Murphy writes this interesting report for us. She says, as I write this, the working week is getting underway in Iran. The roads are busy with cars and taxis. There are people walking to the office, and a man and woman just drove past on a motorbike, her blonde hair catching on the breeze. In the apartment opposite, I can see a family having breakfast. It could be a normal morning in any capital city, 1,000 or so miles away. However, talks which directly affect all these people have just broken down. And what that means for them, what it means for all of us, is not clear yet. The Americans are blaming the Iranians. The Iranians are blaming the Americans. No surprise there. Much will be made of 21 hours of talks, but in reality, it's nothing if there was a real wish to deliver change. It was way too long if both sides went determined to hold on to their positions. Over the past 6 weeks, the United States and Israel have thrown almost everything military at this war. They likely will again, but military force has not achieved a single one of its myriad objectives. In fact, things are far worse in the Strait of Hormuz. Is now crippled with the knock-on global consequences. The fundamental premise that the Iranians would concede as a result of this war has been exposed as a total miscalculation. History, recent and ancient, teachers have gave that miscalculation was. The Iranians did not arrive in Pakistan believing they were beaten or weakened. On a contrary, the US, engaging in talks, spoke to them of the strength of their position. So now the choices are even trickier for the United States. Military action hasn't achieved its goals. Diplomacy hasn't either. They will expand their military campaign? Probably. Will they try again with diplomacy? Maybe. Are they strategically stuck? Definitely. All sides can do more harm than the other, and most likely will see that. The president's threats to Iranian delegation and that they were only alive to negotiate point to his thinking. In other news, Hungarians, or should I say, are casting ballots on Sunday, in what is widely seen as Europe's most consequential election this year. A vote that could unseat populist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, an ally of US President Donald Trump after 16 years in power. It is a key moment for Orbán, the European Union's longest-serving leader, and one of the biggest antagonists. Polls opened at 6 a.m. local time and are scheduled to close at 7 p.m. Orbán and his top challenger, Peter Magyar, arrived at separate polling stations in Budapest at nearly the same time to cast their votes. Speaking to reporters outside, Orbán, 62, said the campaign had been a great national moment on our side and thanked activists and supporters for their work. I'm here to win, he said. The election was closely watched in countries around Europe and beyond, which is a testament to outseize the role Orbán occupies in the far-right populist politics world. Members of Trump's Make America Great Again movement are among those who see Orbán's government and his political party as shining examples of conservative anti-globalist politics in action, while he is relieved by advocates of liberal democracy and the rule of law. Casting her ballot in Budapest early Sunday, retiree Etsa Smudzi, 62, said she felt the election was basically our last chance to see anything vaguely resembling democracy in Hungary. We all have to make real effort to show to the world that we are not what people thought we were in the past 10 years, she said. After the first hour of voting, 3.46% of registered voters had cast a ballot, according to the National Election Office. The figure was a record in Hungary's post-socialist history and nearly twice the turnout from the same period of the 2022 elections. And finally, teams of experts will be deployed to the NHS trusts with the highest rates of corridor care in a bid to end the unacceptable, undignified practice the government has announced. The worst offending trusts will be given help to understand data better and improve patient flow, as ministers aim to eradicate corridor care by the end of the Parliament. It comes as the Department of Health and Social Care revealed the locations of 40 new and expanded same-day emergency care and urgent care centres, which will allow patients to be treated faster and ease pressure on A&Es. NHS England published its definition of corridor care in March. Patients spending 45 minutes or more in clinically appropriate areas of emergency department or wards, such as hallways or waiting rooms, are considered to have experienced corridor care. Trusts have started collecting data on the practice, which will be published for the first time in May. Last month, ITV News reported on a woman who lost her husband after he spent 36 hours in the carnage of an A&E corridor while suffering fatal swelling on the brain. Tom Firth, 66, from Cheshire, was rushed to A&E department in Leighton Hospital in June 2025, suffering with a temperature, confusion and struggling with his speech. It was carnage, bodies everywhere, nurses running around. Tom's wife, Julie Chard, told STV News. Tom was left in the corridor for 36 hours, undiagnosed, with a serious condition called epilepsy. I don't think I pronounced that right, so I do apologise. Which causes inflammation on the brain and requires urgent medical treatment. He was eventually diagnosed a week after he first attended A&E, but due to the brain damage, which had already occurred, Tom never recovered and died weeks later. Under the new initiative, the Getting It Right First team will work with leaders at the worst offending NHS trusts to offer support on improving patient flow and understanding data to cope better with surges in demand. Health Secretary Wes Streeting said, "For too long, the normalisation of corridor care has been backed into our NHS. It is unacceptable, undignified, and exactly why this government is shifting the dial for patients and staff. We're sending in specialist teams of experts to identify the causes in some of the worst offending trusts and swiftly rectify the problems they find." Mr. Streeting said the announcement during the visit to Queen's Hospital in Romford, which has provided 10,000 fewer hours of corridor care in February than in the same month last year. The hospital's emergency department was it has introduced a new assessment process, which has cut waiting times by 37 minutes. And that is all we have time for today. We'll be back again at 10 with the Hungary elections, but from us on the Evening News team. Bye bye.